Hi, my name is Miss Davis, and I am the Adult Services Librarian here at Vista Grande. Today we're going over the new Literati book for this month called Slave Stealers by Timothy Ballard, and it's a heavy subject. It talks about human trafficking, child trafficking, and relations to sex trafficking and organ harvesting and labor. And Timothy Ballard, the author, has a law enforcement background, and he was part of like the CIA, and there was the online child trafficking department that he was a part of, and he realized that there was actually more people. This was back in the early 2000s, so just barely 20 years ago, which sounds bananas, but barely 20 years ago. And he said that it was a new thing to do online tracking of these people to find the perpetrators of these human trafficking rings. And he actually discovered or realized that most of the human trafficking is actually overseas, and so the book is largely based off of that, where he actually pulled out of the US government, and he says doing it through a US government agency actually had a lot of bureaucratic red tape and issues. So he actually could do more as a private organization. So he ended up getting some friends and started to look into these things. His main inspiration was Harriet Jacobs, who was a slave back in the during the American time of slavery in the 1800s, and she wrote a book called Incidents in the Life of a Slave, which is heavily cited within this particular book. And he was using her narrative and using her memoirs in hopes to find out the pros and cons, I should say that, but the differences and similarities between the slavery from the Civil War era to modern day slavery. And he was trying to find connections of things that worked for the Underground Railroad movement and getting slaves out during the 1800s, and how can they extrapolate it into present day, and how they can try to use the same concepts, hopefully, and to see if it works out. So you have to understand the slave trade, present day slave trade, is a $1 billion industry, and the US is the most, has the most demand for such, I loathe to say product, but of human trafficking, sex slaves, and children trafficking, as well as they have the demand, but they also have the largest setups. So they're trying to constantly bring in more children, more traffic basically into the US to meet that demand. And so some of the main differences between the historical slavery and the modern day slavery is that historical slavery was based on race and power, and it was backed by laws, whereas modern day slavery is based on profit and also power, but and it is not backed by laws, so it operates outside. That being said, there's a lot of corruption within the governments worldwide in regards to this sort of thing, and these things have been going on forever, literally forever. So he was trying to do it. The book is based off of his operations of his organization, which are called the Underground Railroad Operation. Yes. And they have based out of Haiti, because he has these sort of connections with children in Haiti. And so that's how it started. But there's a couple of other countries that his organization has branched out to. There are a lot of more and more new organizations that are somewhat similar vein of trying to save these children and get them out of their circumstances, and it is horrific. So it talks a lot about Harriet Jacobs and her memoirs and what the absolute vendetta that her master had for her, and the similarity between that single-mindedness power over Harriet versus the way that children are being handled nowadays. And so they go into detail about present operations. It was a year ago, during the pandemic, which we're still in a way, I kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I was kind of looking up similar topics. And so many children presently go through the tunnel system here in the U.S., which natural tunnels as well as man-made tunnels. There's a lot more natural tunnels on the East Coast than there are on the West. The West tends to have more man-made tunnels, just geographically. And for the East Coast, it's more the Appalachian Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountain area where there's loads of tunnels. So they said be very careful when you're out and about with your children hiking and stuff, and never leave them. They said mostly it happens during crowded places like Disneyland and amusement parks and those sort of things. The Timothy Ballard said his main thing that he's come across is that the orphanages in some of these places are fronts for human trafficking. Not all overseas orphanages are like this. There are a lot of many legitimate ones. But even here in the States, there's orphanages and other institutions such as boarding schools are these sort of situations where they're just a front for human trafficking rings. And so I talk about going undercover. He talks about going undercover presently to try to find these children, because he looks like this blue-eyed blonde Aryan man in his 40s. So he looks like a regular client for these sort of trafficking ring. So he would go under, but it said it was so psychologically damaging that he had to pretend and portray these sort of monster people and kind of be in these groups with these people who are customers of these situations, and how they brag about the youngest one that they had, or some of the more perverse way of handling the children and laughing about it and sharing stories like, oh, that's a good idea, that's great, and he's just dying inside and he's trying to play along so he can get the information, so he can, like a sting operation. It's not hugely graphic, but there's a lot of things that are heavily implied, and I find it very nerve-wracking and very agitating, be very triggering for people who are familiar or who've had experience with these situations. There's also another group that's a little bit different about trying to find missing children called Trace Labs. And that's more putting hackers to good use, basically. So there's these symposium, these like they kind of gamify the system and trying to locate people as far as all their online traces and online stuff. So they'll get like 20 hackers real life hackers, and the trace labs will assign cases points. How they assign points at this, I'm not exactly sure. I know that the date, like how long ago it was, the age they went missing, and the gender will also increase the points that they assign. So some of these hackers will go in and they'll try to, all over online from all over the world, will look and try to find lost pictures and bills and like bank statements for their adults, or pictures on Facebook, and just scrub social media and try to find these things, and they'll compile it and they'll send it to the police to try to reopen cases, or to be more particular about, oh, look at the background of where these pictures were taken. Another thing that they have that I've seen on YouTube is that there are, human trafficking is a situation that goes on right underneath our noses. They've had local enforcement talk about these situations where girls be dropped off in public places like restaurants and what have you, and go into the restrooms and have appointments essentially, and then they'll be picked up after the appointment is done, and their handler will take them to another entrance, maybe a park bathroom or some other public situation, and to be of service to these adults, and on and on. So YouTube videos also talk about the hairdressers. They give tips to hairdressers and what to look for as far as the adult, usually but not always, a man with a child, with a woman, a female child, wanting them to look really different, and dyeing their hair or cutting their hair or doing things with their face, I don't know, dyeing the eyebrows, I don't know, and to take note of the demeanor of the child, how they're being responding to these drastic changes, and for the hairdresser to engage in these, to try to get a feel for it. There's been some hairdressers who have stopped child trafficking because of this awareness, and it's this insidious, it's everywhere. These little tentacles are all over. The book is really actually an easy read, but it's just heavy content, so take it for what you will. That was this. It was recommended by my supervisor, by the library manager. So it's an important topic. It's a heavy, unfortunate topic, but it's an important topic that is still playing out in the media. So I'm having pictures of children in Arizona, missing children from Arizona, that goes back to, I think, the late 1950s. So if you see any of these people look familiar, I'm going to put the information for the National Missing Children's Hotline that you can either call or contact if you have anything. The next book for next month, later this month, is the finale called Recursion, and it's a fiction book and it's a thriller, and it's very suspense and kind of twisty. It's sort of like the Dan Brown books, like Da Vinci Code meets Inception. So it's this will be the next book, and it'll be the last book for the season. And you can pick this up if you haven't read it yet and sign out at the front desk here at Vista. I'm going to include the organizations and groups, a listing and websites for them in the comments section or in the brief below. So this was The Missing Children's. I encourage you to read it just for your awareness. And then this is the last book, the finale, which will be will end with a bang. So thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next month.